Welcome to Unit 4. This is topic 4.1, the rise of Islam. The goal here being for you to be able to explain the origins and core beliefs of the Islamic faith. With over 2 billion people following the Islamic faith, it is one of the largest religions in the world today. So it's important that we have some idea of where it came from, what the people who follow this faith believe, and how it impacted history. Of the 5 major faiths that dominate the world today, Islam is by far the newest of them. Judaism predates all the major religions of the world, coming together around 1800 BCE, so that's almost 4,000 years ago, followed by Hinduism and Buddhism, which we talked about, and Christianity, which we talked about in our Roman unit. So we're jumping forward to the year 613 Common Era, which is generally marked as the beginning of the Islamic faith. Where we left off in the last unit, the Roman Empire collapsed in the late 5th century. At least it collapsed in the West. As we referenced, it continues to go on for another 1,000 years in the East, and historians have renamed it the Byzantine Empire. Islam becomes a religion in the early 7th century, so it's about 200 years after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. There is a lot of overlap between the Islamic communities and the Byzantine Empire. So in this unit, we're going to be kind of interweaving the stories of the Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, and the Islamic Caliphate. The first key question we're trying to answer is, where did Islam come from? Geographically speaking, Islam starts in the Arabian Peninsula, right here. This is the region we generally refer to as the Middle East today. For reference, here's Egypt, here's kind of the Byzantine Empire, Greece, Rome. Over here is Judea and Jerusalem, which will play a very important role. But Islam as a faith kind of starts right here in this region. You'll notice it's located between 2 dominant empires, the Byzantine Empire, known as the Eastern Roman Empire, and the Persian Empire, the Sassanid Empire. The Arabian Peninsula itself is very hot, very dry, with a lot of sand dunes and rocky terrain. It's got very limited potential for farming, and so in order to support themselves, the people who live there, the tribes, essentially live a more nomadic lifestyle, herding animals like camels, goats, and sheep. At least they did at this time. They did have major settlements like the cities of Mecca and Medina, but a lot of people lived in this herding, nomadic type lifestyle. Many of these people belonged to what were called the Bedouin clans. These are nomadic clans, essentially extended families that moved together to find water and pasture land to feed their herded animals. Bedouins valued loyalty to the tribe, hospitality to people who were part of the clan, and as well as warrior skills for survival. They also excelled in oral poetry and storytelling to preserve their culture. Now, as mentioned, this is a very dry, rocky area. They're nomadic, they're wandering around, so oases become very important for their survival. An oasis is essentially a small town and farming community that develops around pockets of water, water sources in the desert. And this becomes basically lifelines for the nomadic clans as they're traveling from one area to the other. And because the nomadic clans are, nomadic, wandering around, they begin to connect the different areas across the Arabian Peninsula through trade networks. These trade networks over in the Middle East here connected in this region through the Persian Empire to the Silk Road, which travels all the way east to India and China, and then also connects over here to the west to the Mediterranean seaports of Jerusalem, Damascus, Tyre when it existed, right? So connecting to the world that we were talking about in the Mediterranean Sea. Mecca right here was a culturally diverse trading center at the heart of this lifestyle. Before the rise of Islam, religion there was mostly polytheistic. They worshipped a lot of gods. You'd see a mix of Zoroastrian beliefs. You'd see some people worshiping Judaism, some people worshiping the Christian faith. And then there were the more traditional gods that date back thousands of years as well being practiced. So it was a very polytheistic melting pot of different religious groups living in the city of Mecca and across the Arabian Peninsula. It's into this world that a man named Muhammad was born, and he becomes the central figure in the establishing of the Islamic faith. So in his early life, Muhammad was born sometime around the year 570 CE. Again, we don't have the exact date for this. He was a real person, absolutely. There's a lot of historical records proving he was a person that was alive and was probably born around the year 570 in Mecca or close by to the city of Mecca, and he was part of one of the dominant Bedouin tribes. So his family had a lot of power. He worked as a caravan trader, traveling widely across the region, and there he met different people of Jewish faith, Christian faith, and merchants from very, very far away lands. And so he was able to be interconnected to all the stuff that's going around. His reputation in general was that he was trustworthy and he married into a wealthy family. So he was coming from a life of kind of luxury, but he was also a man of honor and a man of his word, according to everyone who met him. Now, as Muhammad traveled around as a merchant, he was known to also spend some time meditating in a cave. And it's said that during one of these sessions of meditation, around the year 610 Common Era, Muhammad says that an angel or an archangel appeared to him, bringing him a message. These messages would become the foundation of the Islamic. It's also important to note that these angels and the God that the message was coming from is the exact same God worshipped by both Jewish people and Christians, meaning Jews, Christians, and Muslims all worship the exact same God, the God of the prophet Abraham that we discussed way back in the first unit of this class when talking about the origins of the Jewish faith. So the next big question we're trying to answer here is, well, what did Muhammad preach as part of this new religion? Well, like Christianity and Judaism, it preached monotheism, the belief in one God. A common misunderstanding is that Muslims named their God Allah, but the word Allah is just the word for God in Arabic, which means regardless of which God you're worshiping, if you're saying the word God in Arabic, you're saying the word Allah. The other thing that he preached about monotheism was that people needed to submit themselves to the will of this God. Islam itself is a word that means submission to the will of God, and those who submit to God's will are known as Muslims. To be a Muslim, you must practice the 5 pillars of Islam. These are the 5 most important things that all people must do if they wish to follow the Islamic faith. The first pillar is known as faith, the declaration of belief in one God and a belief that Muhammad was his final prophet. The second pillar is known as prayer. You have to pray at 5 specific times every day, facing in the direction of the holy city of Mecca. These times are dawn, midday after the sun passes its highest point, afternoon before the sun starts to turn orange, sunset when the sun is going down, and night when the red light has gone from the sky and the sun is completely gone. These are the 5 times every single day every Muslim in the world must pray in the direction of Mecca, which is the most important city in Islam. The third pillar is known as zakat, or almsgiving. This is the idea that if you are able to, you should support the poor or those in need by giving some of what you have to those who have less. So essentially it's the idea you need to take care of those in your community who have less than you. The fourth pillar is fasting, that is, not eating or drinking during daylight in the holy month of Ramadan. Many religions have this facet to them where the idea is you deny something to yourself in order to show your dedication and devotion to God. For instance, many Christians would give up eating meat on Fridays as a sign of their devotion to God. It's also why in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, you see so many fish fry Fridays. The fifth and final pillar of Islam is known as the Hajj. Once in their life, if possible, every Muslim must take a religious pilgrimage to the city of Mecca and retrace the steps of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, if you don't have the money or your health is failing, you are exempt from this. However, if you have the health and you have the financing to do it, you are expected to take this trip once in your life. This is a deeply religious experience with millions of Muslims converging on the city of Mecca at the same time each year in order to perform this pilgrimage, literally retracing the steps of their prophet, living out the stories that they've been reading in the cities that they've been praying in the direction of their entire life. All of these pillars are designed to keep people focused on the faith and following the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad in order to earn their way into heaven. For Muslims, their highest source of religious authority is a book known as the Quran. You can think of it as like the Bible for Muslims. It's a holy book of Islam that holds God's revelations to Muhammad. Now, it is only allowed to be printed in Arabic to be considered an official copy of the Quran. And this is because when you translate words from one language to another, the meaning can slightly change. So in order to make sure that these teachings don't change, the Quran must only be written in Arabic. Now, there are translations into other languages, but those aren't considered official Qurans. And if you truly believe, like Muslims do, that Muhammad is the last prophet of God, and this is the last chance humans have of getting it right to earn their way into heaven, it becomes extremely important that the meaning of these words don't change over time. Now, you'll see this in Christianity. Wars will start and factions will form within the Christian faith because as the Christian Bible gets translated from one language to another, slight changes can happen in the meaning of words, and this can start wars and lead people off of what maybe have been the original intent of the founder of the Christian faith. The second source of religious authority for Muslims is a book known as the Sunnah, the traditions and practices of Muhammad that Muslims must try to follow. After all, if Muhammad was chosen by God to be the last prophet, then acting like him would be a way to earn your way into heaven, to be as good as the prophet. Essentially, it's asking, well, what would Muhammad do in this situation, and then do that thing. Sharia is another source of religious authority. It is the legal code for family, trade, crime, and government based on the Quran and the Sunnah. Now, different communities will follow stricter or less strict versions of this, just as you see in, say, different Christian communities. So how did people react when Muhammad started preaching this message that he's the final prophet and people need to kind of get on board or they'll never have a chance to get into heaven? Now, Mecca was a source of pilgrimage. People from all over the region would come to the city of Mecca along these trade routes, and there would be temples to all these different gods. And so people came there for trade, but also for worship. This made the people who controlled the city of Mecca, the dominant tribe, very, very wealthy. And, well, if people stopped coming there for this religious pilgrimage to visit the temples to these different gods, that means they'd be losing out a lot of money. So the leaders of the community persecuted and attacked early Muslims, forcing them to leave the city of Mecca and go to the city of Medina. This forced migration of Muhammad and his early followers from Mecca to the city of Medina is what we consider the start of the Islamic calendar. Once in the city of Medina, they formed the first Muslim government under a constitution, a written set of laws that guaranteed religious freedoms and mutual defense of everyone within the community. It united Muslims, Jewish people, Christians, and non-Muslim tribes in the city of Medina. In many ways, you can see it as a precursor to the American Constitution that many of us live under now. You can see in this image here the 12 different points from this charter, this early constitution, and the rules that people under it must live by. And I would argue that most people would have no problem with. In 630 Common Era, Muhammad and 10,000 followers marched on Mecca, which then surrendered peacefully to Muhammad and his forces. Once in control of the city, they then descended on the Kaaba, the center of life in Mecca. The Kaaba was essentially a central location where different statues or idols to different gods were placed, and all those religious pilgrimages were people coming to this in order to worship statues of their gods. Well, Muhammad destroyed all those statues of non-Abrahamic gods in the Kaaba and then rededicated it to the God of Abraham. Again, that's the same God that Jewish people and Christians worship. Muslims believe that the Kaaba was the site of the very first temple to God built by the prophet Abraham. Again, that prophet that Christians, Muslims, and Jews all believe was the first person that God revealed himself to. This was the beginning of mass conversion of Arabs to the Islamic faith, unifying the Arab people, the people of the Arabian Peninsula, for the very first time. So you can see this color coding here. You're seeing it spread on waves. In the time of Muhammad, this is the area that Muslims become dominant, and then after his death, soon after in the first 4 leaders, this orange area spreads, and then after that into these yellow areas. So you see it spreads rather quickly. And we want to look at now, how is Islam connected to Judaism and Christianity? I keep referencing the prophet Abraham, right? So Jews, Christians, and Muslims are all part of what's called Abrahamic faiths. Now, those aren't the only Abrahamic faiths, but they are the largest and most dominant of them, right? These are just religions that trace themselves back and say that they are worshiping the same God as that prophet Abraham. You can see here a family tree of the prophet Abraham having 2 sons, Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael goes on to basically his descendants become the first Muslims, Isaac's descendants become the first Jewish people, and then from Judaism you get the offshoot Christianity. And this is why all 3 faiths are considered Abrahamic, because then they trace back to Abraham. All 3 religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, worship the exact same God. They all believe laws should be passed based on morality, and all believe God sends prophets to help mankind worship properly when we get off the right path. Muslims also believe that Christians and Jews are people of the book, that is, people deserving of tolerance and protections because they worship the same God as Muslims. They just think that Christians and Jews aren't following the true version of the religion because they had strayed from the path, and Muhammad was the one getting people back on the right path. Muslims also do believe that Jesus of Nazareth was an extremely important prophet. They just don't think that he was the son of their God. So, prophet, messenger of God, not son of God. And again, they just believe that Christians and Jews strayed from the original teachings of the prophet Abraham, and that Muhammad is God's last prophet, our last chance to get this religion thing right. All right, when we get back to class, we're going to be looking at some documents to try to understand why so many people found Islam so appealing, much the same way we did with why many Romans found Christianity appealing. But before we get to that, take a moment here, stop, rewrite today's goal from the top of the video or the top of your note sheet, identify 3 important facts from these notes that help you understand today's goal. Please use complete sentences, complete thoughts, not word fragments, and write at least one question you still have that could help you better meet this learning goal. All right, we'll see you in class.